We'll just use our engines first of all as we head down to the island. We'll have a look at some seals on an island to the south of here. There were a few on the last trip, so hopefully there's still a few around, so we'll have a look for them. And then we'll go out further offshore. So on the last trip we found some harbour porpoises and some common dolphins. So we'll go to these spots and I'll talk about where we're going and why we're looking where we are once we're out there. So then we'll have a good search offshore and probably get quite a long way out, maybe 10 miles to the south, and then we'll work our way down to the west and head out probably past Gannet Head, and we'll visit a seal colony which is in on the coast round towards Land's End, and then we'll probably work our way back up the coast. So, but anyway, we'll get out there and see what we can find. Might see all those things, might see none of them. We'll do our best to find you some of them. We'll go looking in the right places. We're also using the seabirds to help out. So the seabirds also have their own interesting stories which we'll tell you, but where they focus to feed, it can show us where there might be dolphins and porpoises feeding. Yeah, we saw them, and we did then find a load of gannets further west, which is probably, yeah, coming out through the bay, there were lots of porpoises.
Let's see.
So ahead of us here, this is St Clement's Island. We're just out from the lovely village of Mousehole, and we're going to be looking round the island for some of our seals. The seals we get, well, we're looking for Atlantic grey seals. There's two types of seal in Britain, the common seal and the grey seal. Down here in Cornwall, we pretty much exclusively get the greys. We occasionally get visited by common seals. And they use the island here as a fishing outpost. So there is a group that I can see already at it's 12 o'clock straight ahead. If you look about 11 o'clock to the boat, low to the water, there's 3 seals on the rocks and then 1 in the water. I'll try and put them on both sides of the boat. We're also really careful how we handle the boat around resting seals. They feel quite clumsy and vulnerable out of the water, and so if you go racing up too close to them, it's very easy to scare them off the rocks, and then that disrupts their resting time. But also, if they go in at a panic, they can injure themselves quite badly. So we're obviously being really careful of that. So I'm just going to move us in. I'm just watching. I'm watching their behaviour basically. If they lift their heads, that's when they're getting a bit agitated, and that's them telling us to back off a bit. You can see how their fur camouflages them on the rocks. Can be quite hard to make out. So I think, pretty sure these are all females.
Oh yeah.
And I can tell they're females from the shape of the head. So Halicoirus grippus, hook-nosed sea pig is the scientific name, and that's because the males tend to have these big horse-shaped hook Roman noses. The females will also have a bigger head than a common seal might. You'll notice that Josh is taking pictures. Each of the seal's pattern on its fur is unique, so we can use those photos to recognise them. Interestingly, I don't recognise any of these. The younger ones I probably wouldn't recognise, but the older ones, there are regulars that we do recognise. But the island here is quite an important stopping off place, if you like, on the way to other spots. So we get a lot of seals that are not regulars passing through. So by looking at our photos, we can recognise individuals. We can see which ones are regulars on the island. But also then by sharing our photos with other seal researchers, we can see where they go when they're not here. So we can see how they're using the whole Cornish coastline, and even beyond as well. So we know that Cornish seals have been recorded going to Ireland and back, and Wales and Brittany, so they move around a lot more than you would think. Silhouetted to our left at about 9 o'clock, there's 2 different birds there. The one on the left is a great blackback gull, and that's the largest species of gull in the world. They nest on the island. And then to the right, we've got a cormorant, and they're a relative of the, well, we have lesser cormorants and cormorants. Actually, no, it is a lesser cormorant, it's a shag, it's got a much thinner beak. And those guys use the island to rest between fishing trips. There's another big male just behind this rock, in amongst the kelp. So you can see, it's just hidden by the rock, but big long head. So this is a big seal. He's just lying on a rock just below the surface, I think. You can just see his back shining. Much darker than the females, and much longer head. So he's a fully grown adult male. So I did say that it's quite warm for them down here, and sometimes on hot days, hot summer days, they'll just stay in the water like that and not get out because it's too hot for them. I wouldn't describe it as being too hot for them today, although it is a bit sunnier. It's quite relaxed there.
So this cave coming up on our right is the Mousehole, and the lovely village of Mousehole is just behind us. Now, there's a bit of a disagreement among the locals about why Mousehole is called Mouse, but one of the reasons they think is because they named the cave here the Mousehole, and the village got named after that. And that's because the actual cave itself has the shape of a mousehole, or it used to traditionally up until a sort of a recent landfall, which now sort of made it slightly wider. But making it slightly wider means it's a lovely nesting place for Fulmars. And Fulmars, the word Fulmar derives from the Old Norse word for foul gull. But Fulmars are these lovely little white birds you can see on the cliffs there, and they're actually related to birds like albatross and what am I saying? Manx shearwaters. So they're part of that stormbird family, called the tube noses, because they've got a tubular nose, unlike gulls. And the Fulmars are all nesting at the moment on the cliffs, sort of looking after their eggs and raising their chicks. And they're quite lovely little birds. When you see them flying, unlike gulls, because they're called storm, that's the name, is stormbirds. They like to use the storms and those heavier winds to glide over the waves. So rather than flapping, they've got much more sort of shorter, stumpier wings, so they can glide slippily over the waves. Exactly, yeah, that's the ones. And that way they spend less energy on flying. It means they can fly further distances for longer as opposed to gulls. So you can often tell them apart a lot easier in flight. Yeah, there's a lovely Fulmar there. So you can really see that stiff, dark upper wing. There you go. So here we're using the wind thermals coming up over the cliffs just to glide in. But what's quite cool is because they have to glide, they don't fly as much. They've got to get their angles just right. So like with an aeroplane, when they tilt their wings, when they come and land on the cliffs, they've got to just about get their angle right to land. Otherwise, they'll just go, face plant the cliff. So you often see them doing sort of 7 or 10 turns, sort of whipping around the cliffs to try and land on their nest properly.
20 miles up that then.
How long does it take you to get there?
So ahead of us, these white birds on the water, they're gannets. It's the largest species of seabird that nests in the North Atlantic. And when they're feeding, they can be amazing to watch. They'll circle around high up and just fold their wings and fall out of the sky, do spectacular dives. They might hit the water at 60 miles an hour. And the Cornish name for them, sether, is the same word used for dart or arrow, because they look like darts or arrows raining in as they're diving in. And they're really useful to us, because where gannets are diving, it can show us where porpoises and dolphins are feeding, because porpoises and dolphins will trap fish against the surface, and that makes it easy for the gannets to feed. These ones look like they're resting, and they may well have been feeding in this area. We've got this shiny stripe of water, which is where the tide front, two of them, has focused plankton in the water. So the way the tide's interacting, because it's flowing so inside of us, the water's shallower and more uneven, and further out, further out it's deeper. And also the tide's flowing faster over there and less fast in here, so you get more turbulence in behind us, and at the boundary between the turbulence and the non-turbulent water we get these hydraulic fronts, or these tidal fronts forming, and the mechanisms basically focus all the little bits, and so this is like fish food, and that's probably why the gannets have been feeding here. So it's these areas we're visiting. We're not far from a wreck, the Mulberry Dock, which is just ahead of us, and we'll go have a look down towards that in a minute. So Guilemots, they're chocolate brown and white, dagger-like beak. They have a cousin, the Razorbill, which is black and white with a chunkier beak, and also their other cousin, the Puffin, which has the colourful beak. These guys are brilliant at, well, they can swim with their wings. They use their wings like flippers, like penguins do, to dive down to hunt the fish. Incredible divers, and actually that little bird can dive to 180 metres, which is something that we know they can do, but we don't understand how it's physiologically possible for them to do it. So the reason we know is because they found Guilemots and Razorbills tangled up in nets off Newfoundland, and the nets were set 150 metres deep, and they just couldn't understand how they were getting tangled in them. Then they tagged the birds with loggers to record how deep they were diving, and they found the Guilemots going to 180 and the Razorbills 150 metres. So incredible birds. Because their wings are dual purpose, they're not so good at flying. They use loads of energy when they're flying. In fact, 32 times, their metabolic rate's 32 times higher when they're flying than when they're on the water. They nest on the ledges around Land's End. So we're just around this wreck now, the Mulberry Dock. It's a big concrete structure that was being towed across the channel at the end of the Second World War. So it would have been used as part of the Mulberry Harbour they built, this temporary harbour to get the troops ashore. And as they were towing this section across, it was a really stormy day and the tow line broke and it drifted down the channel on the storm, on the tide, and then sunk. And it sticks up like a tower block down there, so it disrupts the tidal flow. And depending on what the tide is doing, it can do various different things, but it basically has, you see these patches of shininess. So that's from turbulence passing the wreck, and that's the evidence of it at the surface, and that's focusing all the little bits in the water. So phytoplankton, tiny microscopic plant life, zooplankton, animal life, and then that's fish food, and then that attracts the fish and that can attract other things. It seems fairly quiet. It's quite a guillemots here, around here, so I think we'll go further south from here. So keep going down to the south, see what we can pick up.
Lovely, so...
Like Razorbill, but obviously they've got like colourful beak. The Puffin, people always expect them to be bigger. There's some Guilemots next to it too. The Guilemots are the larger of the orcs, the Puffins are the smaller of the orcs that we see. I'll try and put it on both sides. They can be tricky Puffins sometimes. So the Puffins are nested on the Isles of Scilly in burrows, like the shearwater do actually. And that colourful beak, they only really have that in the breeding season. It gets more and more orange, so it shows their virility to their mate, I guess.
So you really see the nice difference between the Puffin and the Guillemots on the right. Obviously the Guillemots are much more longer, slender, with that chocolate brown top. Puffin's a lot more squatter, that fat beak and that really sort of white cheek on their face. Go see it. He's right next to you. You really see his level of speaking.
Oh, he's gone down for a minute. I'm hoping he'll come back up. Yeah, he's
Sand eels.
gone for some sand eels. Yeah, the Guillemots, because we got a bit close. They're normally actually more skittish than that, so we've been quite lucky so far. This is our Puffin spot at the moment out here, isn't it?
Yeah. We seem to like feeding it.
So the Guillemots are still up. So we just need to find some Razorbills now for our hat trick of orcs.
If only we had a fourth. Guillemots were. Little Puff still there. Puffin's also actually one of the only baby birds that I think are cute. Lots of baby birds look horrible, don't they? But little pufflings look quite nice, and they're all in their little when they peer their heads out their sort of burrows.
It's quite close on the right now. He's going to go down again. He's looking into the water. But anyway, we'll leave this little Puffin to it, and Guillemots popped up. Safety in numbers.
They don't mind each other.
No, they do hang out together. They have a slightly different feeding niches, as the Guillemots and the Razorbills do as well.
Yeah.
So sometimes you'll see them in very different places, but then also in some places the conditions are good for all of them, and you often see Guillemots and Razorbills mixed in and flying together, and the Puffins as well.
It helps when the fish is distributed more vertically than horizontally as well, don't they? Because then obviously the birds feed at different depths generally, which is how they sort of coexist a bit better, especially when they're like breeding. Obviously, like the Guillemots and the Razorbills, even though they're quite closely related, like with the Puffins. Obviously, the Puffins nest in old rabbit holes and burrows. The Guillemots will then nest on kind of like rocky ledges. Sort of more flat-facing, higher up on rocks. Razorbills then go another layer down and much more sort of on the rocky sheer faces. So they've all got these different sort of habitat niches, whether it's feeding or breeding, so they don't overlap, and that way they reduce competition, so that they actually all sort of complement each other and make the most of all the space and food available.
collecting, and this is where what we call the thermal front sits. So where you've got water coming up from further south from the Bay of Biscay and from a bit offshore, that water's been heated by the sun, so the top layer of it is warmed up. Now there's some by-the-wind sailors, tiny little ones. So the by-the-wind sailors, they're a bit like they're like a colony of hydrozoans. They're a jellyfish, but they're not technically not a jellyfish.
Are they the thing that's like the bit you pull off the top of the bill?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, they look like, when you see them on the beach, they look like they're plastic. Yeah. And they have a little sail on the top that blows them around, and then they're a colony of hydrozoans, and then these little fronds hanging down, feeding on the plankton. I only saw a few, and then they've disappeared. We saw a lot on the last trip. By the wind sailors, yeah, they've disappeared now. But they're at the size where they look like little bubbles at the moment, these ones. And they can tell which ocean current they're following just from the smell of it. They're making that huge migration, finding their way just with their sense of smell. That's just a shame. Okay, we're starting in west. Yeah, there's not really enough wind to sail yet, so we'll just motor sail. And the black and yellow buoy here marks the outer edge of the Runnelstone tidal race. So it's to tell big ships to stay to the south of it, because north of it there's the Runnelstone Reef, which is a big reef structure that comes up. It actually used to stick out on a low tide until the HMS Westminster crashed into it and knocked the top off it. There's also another reef inside that, the Lee Orr, and the way the tide runs through this area, the turbulence created can create good feeding conditions, so that's one of the reasons to come down here and have a little look. So just right in under Gannet Head. See any seal heads at the moment. There's quite a lot of swell running, so they may not have been able to haul out here, so they may not be hanging around this spot today. Amazing cliff formations along here. These are the oldest rocks in England. Every mile you travel southwest from London, you go back in geological time 1 million years for each mile you travel. Romanesque amphitheatre built by a lady called Rowena Cade. It looks a lot older than it actually is. It was only, well, they started building it in the late 20s and watched the first performance in 1932, the Tempest. So she bought this headland for £100 back in 1910, and she built a house on top, and then decided she wanted a Romanesque amphitheatre in her garden. She was involved in local amateur dramatics. Started building it, and they watched this first performance and they realised what a great place it was, and started to have regular shows, and it became increasingly popular, and there's a show on at the moment by looks of it. It was getting really popular, and then the war came along and the military took over Porthcurno. They had barbed wires across the beach and flamethrowers, and they built a big gun emplacement on the stage, and everyone thought that would be the end of the Minack, but Rowena was a pretty determined lady and soon set about repairing it after the war had passed, and even used the pillbox from the gun emplacement as her first ticket office. And that was the ticket office till the 80s, but now it's really developed, and we've got the visitor centre, the cafe, and the changing and props department on the cliff. It's a great place to go. It has to be one of the only theatres in the world where the show can be stopped by passing dolphins or basking sharks. I'm not sure what's on this week. It was further from the furthest thing last week, but I'm not sure what the new show is. The beach coming into view is Porthcurno, and the reason the military were defending this area was see the white hut at the back of the beach. That's where all the undersea telegraph cables come up from the old British Empire. So telegraph communication was quite old technology by the time of the war, but it was still really important because it was a way to communicate without people listening in on you. And quite strategically important, so that's why they were defending it.
Only the Atlantic has the white front.
Right.
The continental type can't get the white front as a juvenile. I think down here we mainly get the Atlantic, and then as you get sort of into Dorset, Hampshire, that's where they start crossing over. Camp on the boat when you actually take them up. Hopefully you can all fall back to the land.
Yeah, that's what he said, yeah.
You're going to have to carry them up the stairs.
That's fine.
Told her, cut her kids.